The moon remembers what kings forget. The cold bit through Ilara's worn cloak as she stood at the edge of the royal encampment, watching torches blaze against the winter sky. She had traveled 3 days through snow and silence to reach this place, not because she sought mercy, but because the dreams would not stop. Every night, the same vision. A boy with silver eyes, bleeding in her arms. A boy who had whispered her name like a prayer before the world tore them apart. But that boy was dead. Or so she had believed for 15 years. The man who ruled this northern kingdom now bore the same eyes, the same scar along his jaw. But he did not remember her. How could he? She had been nothing then. A child Omega from a dying village, too weak to matter, too poor to be claimed, and he had been a prince in chains. She pulled the hood lower over her face as soldiers passed, their armor clinking in rhythm with her heartbeat. The wind carried ash and iron, the scent of a camp preparing for war. Somewhere beyond the firelight, wolves howled, a sound that made her blood hum with recognition. "Move along, girl," a guard barked, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "This is no place for beggars." Ilara did not answer. She had learned long ago that silence was a kind of armor. She turned away, her boots crunching through fresh snow, when a voice cut through the night like steel through silk. "Let her pass." Every soldier froze. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. King Theron stood at the entrance of the command tent, his fur-lined cloak billowing in the wind. He was taller now, broader, carved from shadow and war. The boy she had known was gone, replaced by something ancient and unyielding. But his eyes still held the storm. He looked at her, and for a moment the world narrowed to nothing but the space between them. She saw recognition flicker across his face, faint as candlelight, before it vanished behind the mask of a king. "You," he said, his voice low and edged with something she could not name. "Why have you come?" Ilara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with the only weapon she had left. Truth. "Because you are dying," she said quietly, "and I am the only one who knows why." The wind howled, the moon watched, and the debt of blood between them began to wake. Theron's council erupted in protests the moment Ilara stepped into the war tent. "Your Majesty, this is madness," General Kale snapped, his scarred hand slamming against the map table. "We do not entertain vagrants with prophecies, not when the southern clans prepare to strike." But Theron raised one hand, and silence fell like snow. His eyes never left Ilara's face. "Speak," he commanded. "Tell me what you see." Ilara's fingers trembled as she unwrapped the cloth from around her wrist, revealing a mark burned into her skin. A crescent moon intertwined with a wolf's fang. The same mark that had appeared on Theron's chest the night he had almost died in her arms 15 years ago. "You were poisoned that night," she said, her voice steady despite the memories clawing at her throat. "By Silver and Nightshade, bound with a curse. The healers stopped the bleeding, but they could not remove the venom. It has been growing inside you ever since." Theron's jaw tightened. Around the tent, his commanders exchanged uneasy glances. "How do you know this?" he asked, his tone dangerous. "Because I was there." Ilara's voice broke on the last word. "I was the one who pulled the blade from your chest. I was the one who held you while you bled. And I was the one you forgot." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Theron stepped closer, and she could see the war raging behind his eyes. Doubt, recognition, something that might have been grief. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the mark on her wrist. The moment he touched her, lightning arced through her veins. She gasped, stumbling back, but he caught her, his hand iron-strong around her arm. "I dream of you," he whispered, so low that only she could hear. A girl in the snow, a girl who sang to the moon. Ilara's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same breath. "Then you remember," she said. No. His grip tightened. I remember dying. I remember a voice. But not a face. Not a name. Ilara, she breathed. My name was Ilara. He released her as if burned, stepping back into the shadows of his authority. When he spoke again, his voice was that of a king once more. You will stay. You will explain this curse, and you will tell me how to break it. He turned to his commanders. She is under my protection. Any who harm her answer to me. General Kale bowed stiffly, but his eyes promised retribution. As the council dispersed, Ilara stood alone in the firelight, watching Theron's silhouette disappear into the night. She had come here to save him. She had not expected to still love him. 3 days passed like fever dreams. Ilara was given a small tent at the edge of the encampment, close enough to be watched, but far enough to be forgotten. She spent her hours gathering herbs from the frozen forest, her fingers numb as she worked, remembering the old songs her mother had taught her, the ones that called to the hidden things. Theron came to her on the 3rd night. He arrived without guards, without ceremony, his face carved from exhaustion and something darker. He stood at the entrance of her tent, snow clinging to his hair like stars. Show me, he said. Ilara looked up from the mortar and pestle in her hands, her heart a war drum. Show you what? The mark, the curse. His voice was raw. Everything. She set down her work and rose slowly, crossing the small space between them. In the lantern light, she could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hand rested unconsciously over his heart, where the poison lived. Remove your shirt, she said quietly. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. But then he unlaced the leather and linen, baring his chest to the cold air. The mark was there, just over his heart, a black stain spreading like frost across his skin, pulsing faintly with his heartbeat. It had grown since she last saw it. Soon it would reach his throat. 2 months, she whispered. Maybe less. Theron's jaw clenched. Can you stop it? I can try. She reached out, her palm hovering over the mark. But it will hurt. The curse is tied to memory, to the moment you should have died. To break it, you must remember. Remember what? Me. The word fell between them like an oath. Theron's eyes met hers, and she saw the boy again, the one who had clung to her hand in the darkness, who had whispered thank you with his dying breath. I want to remember, he said hoarsely, but every time I try, there is only pain and blood, no faces, no names. Ilara's hand finally touched his chest, and the world exploded into light. Visions crashed through her mind, Theron as a boy, chained in a dungeon, beaten by men who wore his father's colors, a betrayal from within, a blade in the dark, and a small Omega girl who had found him by accident, who had sung to him of the moon and mercy. When the vision released them, they were both on their knees, gasping. You saved me, Theron breathed, wonder and horror warring in his voice. You were just a child, and you saved me. Ilara's tears fell hot against her frozen cheeks. And you told me you would find me again. You promised. I looked, he said, his voice breaking. For years, I looked. But the village was gone. Everyone was gone. I know. She reached up, cupping his face with trembling hands. I know. And now? I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The breaking of the curse began at dawn. Ilara prepared the ritual in the old way, moonwater blessed under the last full moon, ash from a funeral pyre, and her own blood drawn fresh from her wrist. She worked in silence, while Theron watched from the entrance of the tent, his presence a constant weight against her awareness. This will bind us, she warned without looking at him. Not as mates, not yet, but as echoes. You will feel what I feel, see what I see. And you will feel my pain, he said. I already do. He entered the tent then, kneeling before her in the circle she had drawn with salt and silver. In the pale morning light, he looked like something from a legend, a king brought low by fate, waiting for judgment. Alara dipped her fingers in the mixture and traced the mark on his chest, whispering words in the old tongue, the language of wolves and moon-touched things. The mark burned black, then silver, then began to recede like shadow before flame. Theron's body went rigid, his teeth clenched against the agony. She felt it too, the poison fighting back, clawing at his heart, demanding payment for the life it had been denied. "Stay with me," she whispered, her hand pressed over his heart. "Stay." And then the memories came flooding back, not just the night of his near death, but everything. The girl who had found him in the dungeon, who had stolen keys and medicine, who had sung lullabies in a language she barely knew. The girl who had promised him that mercy was stronger than vengeance. The girl he had loved with a child's desperate, absolute faith. When the ritual ended, Theron collapsed forward into her arms, his breathing ragged, his body shaking with released anguish. "Ilara," he said her name like a confession. "Gods, Ilara, I remember everything." She held him while he wept, this king, this warrior, this boy she had never stopped loving. And when his tears finally ceased, he pulled back just enough to look at her. "Why did you come back?" he asked. "After 15 years, why now?" "Because the goddess sent me a vision," she admitted. "She showed me your death, and she told me I was the only one who could prevent it." "The goddess." His voice was bitter. "The same one who let my people slaughter yours?" "The same one who kept us both alive," Alara countered. "The same one who brought me back to you." Theron's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. "I don't deserve you," he said. "Redemption is not about deserving," she replied. "It is about choosing. Every day, every moment." He leaned forward until their foreheads touched, and in that small space between them, something ancient and inevitable began to wake. The southern clans attacked at midday. Alara was gathering water from the frozen stream when she heard the horns, 3 sharp blasts that sent ice through her veins. She dropped the bucket and ran, her feet flying over snow and stone, back toward the camp. Chaos had erupted. Soldiers scrambled for weapons while flames licked at the outer tents. Through the smoke, she saw them, warriors bearing the crimson banners of the Bloodfang clan, their wolves massive and battle-scarred. "Alara!" Theron's voice cut through the madness. He appeared on horseback, his sword already drawn and dark with blood. "Get to the command tent, now!" But before she could move, a wolf lunged from the shadows, jaws wide, eyes feral with killing intent. Time fractured. Ilara's hand shot out instinctively, and light erupted from her palm, silver and blinding, ancient as the first moon. The wolf yelped and retreated, its fur smoking where the light had touched. Every fighter in the vicinity froze, staring at her. "Pathfinder," someone whispered. The word spread like wildfire. "She is Pathfinder born." Theron's eyes widened in shock, but there was no time for questions. Another wave of attackers surged forward, and he wheeled his horse around, shouting commands. Ilara ran toward the command tent as ordered, but her mind reeled. Pathfinder, the old bloodline, the healers and seers who had been hunted to extinction, or so everyone believed. Inside the tent, General Kale waited with 3 other commanders, their faces grim. "The girl stays with us," Kyle said flatly. "If she truly bears the gift, she is too valuable to lose." "I am not a weapon," Alara said, her voice sharp. "You are whatever the king needs you to be." Kyle's smile was cold. "And right now, he needs leverage." Before she could respond, An explosion rocked the camp. The tent's center pole cracked, and Alara dove aside as canvas and wood came crashing down. When she clawed her way free of the debris, Kyle and his men were gone, and standing in their place was a man she did not know. He was tall and angular, his eyes the color of amber, his smile predatory. "Ilara of the Ashwood line," he said, his voice smooth as poison. "I have been searching for you a very long time." She scrambled backward, summoning that silver light again. But he moved faster, impossibly fast. His hand closed around her wrist, and agony shot through her arm. "Your light cannot harm me, little healer," he purred. "I am Victor of the Blood Fang, and I am the one who cursed your precious king 15 years ago." Alara's blood turned to ice. "You, me." His grip tightened. "Did you think breaking the curse would be the end? No, sweet child. It was only the beginning." He dragged her toward the burning edge of camp, and she fought with everything she had, clawing, kicking, screaming. But he was too strong, too prepared, until Theron appeared. The king moved like vengeance incarnate, his sword a silver arc in the firelight. Victor released Alara and drew his own blade, and the two clashed with a sound like thunder. Alara pulled herself upright, her wrist throbbing, watching as the two men fought with brutal precision. Theron was powerful, but Victor was ancient, centuries old, she realized with horror. A vampire. "Run!" Theron roared at her between strikes. "Alara, run!" But she did not run. Instead, she closed her eyes and reached deep into the place where the silver light lived, the gift she had never understood, the power that had marked her from birth. And she called to the moon. Light exploded across the battlefield, blinding and pure. Victor screamed, his body convulsing as the lunar fire burned through his defenses. Theron seized the opening and drove his blade through the vampire's heart. Victor fell, his body turning to ash before it hit the ground. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the moans of the wounded. Theron staggered toward Alara, dropping to his knees before her. His hands shook as he reached for her face. "You stayed," he said, his voice raw with disbelief and something deeper. "You could have run, but you stayed." "I will always stay," she whispered. And in the ashes of the battlefield, surrounded by death and smoke, Theron kissed her, a kiss that tasted of smoke and blood and unspoken promises. The victory was bitter. 30 soldiers dead, twice that number wounded, and the knowledge that Victor had been only the first, that the Bloodfang clan would send more assassins, more curses, until Theron was destroyed. In the war council that night, the commanders argued for retreat, for reinforcements, for diplomatic surrender. But Theron stood silent, his eyes distant, until General Kale finally spoke the question everyone feared. "What is she, Your Majesty?" "Truly." Every gaze turned to Alara, who sat wrapped in a borrowed cloak, her wrist bandaged where Victor had gripped her. Theron's jaw tightened. "She is Pathfinder-born, the last of her bloodline." Murmurs rippled through the council. Pathfinders were legend, gifted Omegas who could see the threads of fate, who could heal what should not be healed, who could call the moon's own light to their hands. They were also considered heretical by the Church, dangerous by the southern kingdoms, and extinct by common knowledge. "She is a liability," Kyle said flatly. "If word spreads that you harbor a Pathfinder, every kingdom from here to the southern sea will unite against you." "Then we keep it secret," Theron replied, his voice cold as winter iron. "Secrets have a way of unraveling, Your Majesty, especially ones written in moonlight and blood." Alara stood, her exhaustion forgotten. "I will leave. I will go north, into the wastelands. No one will find me there. No." Theron's response was immediate, absolute. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "You do not run. Not again. Not ever. If I stay, I endanger everything you have built. You are everything I have built." The words came out raw, unguarded. 15 years ago, you taught me that mercy was strength, that compassion was not weakness. Without you, I would have become my father, a tyrant ruling through fear. You made me into something better, and I will not lose you to politics or prophecy or fear. The council chamber fell silent. General Kyle studied them both with calculating eyes. "Then marry her," he said finally. "Make her your queen. A pathfinder on the throne would terrify your enemies far more than any army." Theron's hands tightened on Alara's shoulders. "I cannot ask that of her." "You are not asking," Alara said softly, meeting his gaze. "I am choosing." Something broke and rebuilt itself in Theron's expression. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "Are you certain?" he whispered. "Because I am not offering a fairy tale. I am offering a throne built on blood and stone, enemies at every border, and a king who still wakes screaming from nightmares." "I am offering the same," she replied, an omega marked by prophecy, hunted by zealots, who still hears the voices of the dead. "We are both broken, Theron. Perhaps that is why we fit." He kissed her then, in front of the entire council, a kiss that was promise and surrender and the beginning of something neither kingdom nor curse could destroy. When they finally broke apart, General Kale was smiling for the first time since Alara had arrived. "Then it is decided," he said. "We prepare for war, and we prepare for a wedding. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen." The wedding was planned for the next full moon, 3 weeks that felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. Alara spent her days learning the politics of the northern court, the names of the noble houses, the histories written in blood and betrayal. She spent her nights with Theron, walking the frozen battlements, speaking of everything and nothing. "Tell me about your village," he asked one night, his hand warm in hers despite the bitter cold. "Tell me about before." So she did. She spoke of the Ashwood settlement, a small community of omegas and outcasts who had lived in harmony with the forest. She spoke of her mother, who had been a healer, who had taught Alara the old songs and the names of stars. She spoke of the day the soldiers came, bearing orders from a king who feared what he did not understand. "They killed everyone," she said, her voice steady despite the grief that never truly healed. "Everyone except me. My mother hid me in the root cellar, told me to stay silent no matter what I heard, and I did. I stayed silent while they burned everything." Theron stopped walking, pulling her into his arms. "I am sorry," he said into her hair. "I am so sorry. It was not your doing. It was my father's, my kingdom's. That makes it mine to carry." She pulled back to look at him, then carry it by being different, by building something better. "With you," he said, "with me." But peace was fragile as frost. 2 nights before the wedding, an assassin made it past the guards and into Theron's chambers. Alara woke to the sound of steel on steel, her heart hammering as she scrambled from the bed. Theron fought the intruder in the dark, both of them moving with lethal precision. The assassin was fast, trained, but Theron was fighting for something greater than duty or honor. He was fighting for her. The assassin's blade found its mark, slicing across Theron's ribs. He stumbled, and the killer lunged for the final blow. Alara's scream tore through the night, and with it came light. Pure, searing, silver fire that erupted from her hands and consumed the assassin whole. When the light faded, there was nothing left but ash and the smell of burned flesh. Theron pressed a hand to his bleeding side, staring at her with wide eyes. "You killed him." "I protected you." Her voice shook. "There is a difference." He crossed to her, wincing with each step, and took her face in his bloodied hands. "I know," he said, "and I am grateful, but that power, Alara, it will draw attention. It will make you a target. I have been a target my entire life. She covered his hands with her own. At least now I can fight back. The guards arrived then, flooding the room with torches and questions. But Theron sent them away with curt orders, allowing only the healer to enter and stitch his wound. When they were finally alone again, Ilara helped him back to bed, her hands gentle as she cleaned the blood from his skin. 3 days, he murmured, exhaustion pulling at him. 3 days, and you will be my queen. 3 days, she echoed, and you will be my king. He smiled, a rare, unguarded thing. I already am, Ilara. I have been since the moment you sang to a dying boy in the darkness. She lay down beside him, careful of his wound, and pressed her ear to his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady, a rhythm she had saved twice now. Sleep, she whispered. I will keep watch. And she did, through the long hours before dawn, her silver light burning soft and low in her palm, a ward against the darkness, a promise that no harm would reach him while she drew breath. The full moon rose on the night of their wedding, casting the world in silver and shadow, a luminous orb so bright it seemed close enough to touch, close enough to whisper secrets to. The ceremony took place in the ancient temple at the heart of the capital, a place older than the kingdom itself, built when wolves still spoke to men and the goddess walked among her children. The structure rose from the mountainside like a prayer carved in stone, its walls etched with lunar phases and the names of legendary alphas and omegas, their stories preserved in granite and starlight. Centuries of moonlight had worn the steps smooth, polished by the feet of countless lovers who had climbed here to pledge their lives to one another. Ilara stood in the preparation chamber, her reflection fractured across a dozen mirrors. The gown had been created by the temple's own seamstresses, women who had served the goddess for generations and knew the old ways. White silk flowed like water over her frame, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light and seemed to move of its own accord. The patterns depicted wolves running beneath a crescent moon, their forms so lifelike she half expected them to leap from the fabric. Her hair had been woven with winter roses, the impossible blooms that grew only in the coldest nights, their petals white as bone and dusted with frost that never melted. You look like the goddess herself, whispered Mira, one of the younger priestesses, her eyes wide with reverence. Ilara touched the flowers in her hair, feeling their cold kiss against her fingers. I look like a girl about to marry a king and pretend she belongs. You belong because he chose you, because the moon chose you. Mira adjusted the train of the gown, spreading it out like wings. And because every person in this kingdom has heard the story, how you saved him when you were nothing but a child, how you came back when he was dying, that is not politics or strategy. That is fate. Through the high windows, Ilara could hear the gathering crowd, hundreds of voices blending into a low hum of anticipation. The northern houses had all sent representatives. Even some of the southern clans had come, curious or calculating, drawn by rumors of the Pathfinder Queen. The high priestess entered then, ancient and bent with years, her eyes milky with blindness, but somehow still seeing everything. She carried a bowl of silver water, blessed under 13 full moons. Drink, she commanded, her voice like wind through stone. It will steady your heart and open your sight. Ilara took the bowl and drank. The water was cold and tasted of metal and moonlight. Immediately, her senses sharpened. She could hear individual heartbeats in the crowd below, smell the pine and snow on the wind, feel the pulse of power running through the temple's foundations like blood through veins. The goddess is awake tonight, the priestess said, smiling her terrible, knowing smile. She has been waiting for this union a very long time. Before Ilara could ask what she meant, horns sounded, 3 long, mournful notes that echoed across the mountains. It was time. Ilara walked alone down the long aisle, no father to give her away, no family to witness her vows. The absence should have hurt, but instead, it felt right. She had been alone for so long that this solitary walk felt like honoring all the years she had survived, all the nights she had endured, all the choices that had led her here. The temple was packed with northerners who had come to see their king marry a ghost made flesh. Torches lined the walls, their flames dancing in the drafts, casting moving shadows that made the carved wolves seem alive. The air was thick with incense, pine and myrrh and something older, something that had no name but smelled of wild places and forgotten oaths. Every eye turned to watch her pass. Some faces were kind, some curious, some cold with calculation. She met each gaze steadily, her chin lifted, her stride even. She was not just an Omega anymore. She was Pathfinder-born. She was the woman who had called moonlight to her hands and burned a vampire to ash. She was the future queen, and she would not shrink. Theron waited at the altar in ceremonial armor, black as midnight and chased with silver, each plate etched with protective runes. A cloak of white wolf fur draped across his shoulders, the pelt of an alpha who had died protecting his pack. His dark hair had been pulled back, revealing the strong lines of his face, the scar along his jaw that she had traced with her fingers countless times. But it was his eyes that held her, storm gray and burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. When she reached him, he extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. His grip was warm and steady, an anchor in the swirling uncertainty of the moment. The high priestess stepped between them, raising her gnarled hands to the sky. We gather beneath the full moon to witness the binding of Alpha and Omega, of King and Pathfinder, of two souls torn apart by time and brought together by choice. The crowd murmured their assent, a sound like wind through trees. Marriage is not a reward, the priestess continued, her blind eyes somehow finding both of them. It is not a fairy tale or a finish line. It is a war fought side by side, a burden shared, a choice remade every dawn. It is blood and moonlight, and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. She lifted the ceremonial blade, silver and ancient, its handle wrapped in leather worn smooth by generations of hands. This blade has witnessed 10,000 unions. It has tasted the blood of kings and beggars, warriors and healers. It knows no difference between them. Before the moon, all are equal. Before love, all are vulnerable. She turned to Theron first. Do you, Theron of the Northern Crown, son of tyrants and heir to wars, take this Omega as your mate, your equal, your fate? Do you swear to honor her choices, protect her autonomy, and stand beside her when the world demands you stand above? Theron's voice rang through the temple, clear and absolute. I do. By moon and blood, by choice and consequence, I take Alara as my mate, my equal, my fate. I will honor her until my last breath leaves my body and beyond, into whatever darkness or light awaits. The priestess turned to Alara. Do you, Alara of the Ashwood line, daughter of the slain and bearer of the ancient gift, take this Alpha as your mate, your equal, your fate? Do you swear to share your truth, guard his heart, and stand beside him when the crown weighs heaviest? Alara's voice trembled, but did not break. I do. By moon and blood, by choice and consequence. I take Theron as my mate, my equal, my fate. I will stand with him through every war, every winter, every moment when mercy seems impossible. I will remind him why we fight. Then by moon and blood, by choice and consequence, I bind you. The priestess pricked Theron's palm with the silver blade. Dark blood welled up, stark against his pale skin. Then she pricked Alara's palm, and silver light flickered in her blood, a manifestation of her Pathfinder gift that drew gasps from the crowd. The priestess pressed their hands together, palm to palm, so their blood mixed and fell, drop by drop, onto the ancient stone altar. Where it touched, the carvings began to glow, first silver, then gold. then bright enough that people shielded their eyes, and wolves in the distant mountains howled in recognition. The light grew and grew until the entire temple blazed with it, until Alara could feel the goddess's presence like a hand on her shoulder, a voice in her ear whispering, "Well done, daughter. Well done." When the light finally faded, a mark had appeared on both their wrists, a crescent moon intertwined with a crown, the lines so precise they looked tattooed by divine hand. The goddess had witnessed, the goddess had approved. What is joined here cannot be broken by mortal will or divine decree, the priestess declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the temple and beyond, out into the night where it mingled with the wolves' song. You are one spirit, one heart, one flame against the dark. Go forth as king and queen, as Alpha and Omega, as partners in this dance we call survival. Theron pulled Ilara into his arms and kissed her, not gently, not carefully, but with the desperate intensity of a man who had almost lost everything and refused to take a single moment for granted. The crowd erupted in cheers and howls, the sound rising like a wave, like a storm, like a promise that this union would reshape the very foundations of the kingdom. The feast that followed was held in the Great Hall, a massive space with vaulted ceilings and banners from every northern house hanging like captured clouds. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and honeyed breads, winter vegetables preserved in salt and spice, barrels of mead and wine that had been aging since before Alara was born. Musicians played on a raised platform, drums and flutes and stringed instruments that sang of wild places and wilder hearts. People danced with abandon, their movements primal and joyful, wolves in human skin remembering what it meant to celebrate instead of merely survive. Alara sat beside Theron at the high table, her hand never leaving his, watching the revelry with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. General Kale approached, his scarred face softened by drink and something that might have been approval. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing to Alara, "I misjudged you. I thought you were a complication. But watching you stand in that temple, watching the goddess herself acknowledge your union, I understand now. You are not a complication. You are a revolution." "I am just a woman trying to survive," Alara replied. "No," Kyle's smile was sharp. "You are a queen, and queens do not survive. They conquer." As the night deepened and the celebration reached a fever pitch, Theron leaned close to Alara's ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Come with me," he murmured. She followed him from the great hall. Up winding stairs carved into the mountain itself, through corridors she had never seen, passages that grew narrower and older, the stone so ancient it predated the kingdom. Finally, they reached a door made of dark wood, bound with iron, locked with 3 separate mechanisms. Theron produced keys from a chain around his neck and unlocked them one by one. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a room that stole Ilara's breath. It was a library, but not one filled with dusty tomes and forgotten histories. This one was alive. Moonlight poured through crystal windows set into the curved walls, refracting into rainbows that danced across the floor. Plants grew from cracks in the stone, night-blooming jasmine and lunar lilies, their flowers opening to drink the silver light. The ceiling was painted with constellations, but these were not static images. They moved slowly, tracking the real stars outside, a mechanism so ancient and precise that even the royal scholars could not replicate it. Books lined every wall, their spines leather and cloth and materials Ilara could not name. Star charts hung beside anatomical drawings of wolves in mid-transformation. Jars of herbs sat on shelves next to crystals that pulsed with their own soft light. In the center of the room stood a telescope pointed at the sky, surrounded by notebooks filled with elegant handwriting. "This was my mother's sanctuary," Theron said quietly, his voice thick with old grief. "Before my father had her killed for speaking against his wars, she was Omega, like you. And she believed that knowledge was power, that understanding the world could change it. Alara walked slowly through the space, her fingers trailing over book spines, over telescopes and mortars and pestles, over pressed flowers preserved behind glass. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why give me this?" "Because you gave me my life. Twice." He came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, his warmth seeping through the silk of her gown. "Because I want you to have a place in this cold kingdom that is warm, that is yours alone, a place where you can think and learn and remember who you were before you became a queen." Alara turned in his arms, tears streaming freely down her face now. "I love you," she said, the words raw and true. "I have loved you since I was 8 years old, and you told me I was brave for singing to a dying boy. I have loved you through 15 years of silence and searching. I have loved you through every moment of doubt and fear. And I will love you until the stars fall from that painted ceiling and the moon herself goes dark." "I love you," he replied, his own eyes wet. "I have loved you since the moment I woke from death and could not remember your face, but knew I had lost something sacred. I have loved you through every nightmare, every failed search, every moment when I thought I was going mad because I could feel you somewhere in the world but could not find you. And I will love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond whatever comes after this brief, brilliant life." They made love there, in the moonlight and among the books, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promises of the future. He was gentle at first, worshipful, tracing every line of her body as if memorizing her through touch. But gentleness gave way to urgency, to the primal need that comes from almost losing everything. She met his intensity with her own, her nails raking down his back, her voice rising in prayers and pleas and promises. When they finally lay tangled together on furs spread across the floor, Alara's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, that steady rhythm she had saved twice, she knew she had come home, not to a kingdom or a crown or a title, but to him, to this man who had been a boy in chains, who had become a king haunted by mercy, who had chosen love over duty and her over tradition. "Stay with me," she whispered against his skin. "Always," he promised, "always." Spring came slowly to the north, but it came. The transformation was not sudden or dramatic. There was no single day when winter surrendered. Instead, the change arrived in increments, in small surrenders and quiet victories. First, the snow at the base of the mountains began to soften, revealing patches of dark earth beneath. Then the streams started to run faster, swollen with meltwater that sang over rocks worn smooth by centuries. The wolves' howls shifted in tone, no longer mourning the cold and hunger, but celebrating the promise of new life. And in the palace gardens, where nothing had grown for decades, something miraculous occurred. The old tree, an ancient oak that had stood dead and skeletal since before Theron's father took the throne, began to bloom. Not with the green leaves of ordinary oaks, but with flowers of pure silver. They emerged from blackened branches like stars being born, their petals catching moonlight even in daylight, their fragrance sweet and strange and older than memory. The court called it a miracle. The priestesses called it a sign from the goddess herself. Merchants traveled from distant provinces just to see it. Pilgrims left offerings at its roots, and children played beneath its spreading branches, laughing as silver petals fell like snow that did not melt. Alara called it hope. She stood in the garden on the morning of the spring equinox, one hand resting on her still flat belly, watching Theron train with his soldiers in the courtyard beyond. Even from this distance, she could track his movements, the way he moved with both grace and controlled power, every strike of his practiced sword precise, every pivot calculated. He was teaching them a new formation, one based on protection rather than pure offense, emphasizing shields and coordinated defense. The old ways valued individual glory, he called to his men, his voice carrying across the yard. But glory does not keep your brothers alive. Glory does not win wars, trust does, discipline does. Fighting as one body, one mind. Elara smiled, pride warming her chest. He was becoming the king she had always known he could be, not because she had changed him, but because she had reminded him of what he'd always carried inside. Theron caught sight of her watching and immediately stopped, sheathing his sword despite the protests of his men who wanted to continue. He crossed the yard in long strides, removing his training gloves as he walked, his face transforming from the stern mask of a commander to something softer. "You should not be out in the cold," he said, though his smile betrayed the scolding. His hand came up automatically to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "It is not cold anymore," she replied, catching his hand and bringing it down to rest over her stomach. "And I have something to tell you." His brow furrowed in concern. "Are you unwell? Should I summon the healers?" "No." Her smile widened. "Feel it. Can you feel it?" He stilled, his large hand spread across her abdomen, his eyes searching hers with sudden understanding. "Are you?" "Yes." The word came out breathless, joyful, terrified. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a child." For a long moment, Theron was utterly speechless. His mouth opened and closed without sound, his eyes going wide with shock that rapidly transformed into wonder. Then, with a wordless shout of joy, he swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing like she had never heard him laugh, free and young and unburdened. "A child," he said, setting her down with exquisite care, as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "We are going to have a child. Elara, we are going to be parents." "We are going to have a future," she corrected, her hands coming up to frame his face. "A real future. Not just survival, but life." His eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I am afraid," he admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I am terrified, actually. What if I fail them? What if I become my father? What if—" "Stop!" She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing the spiral of fear. "You will not fail. You will not become him. Do you know how I can be certain?" "How?" "Because you are already afraid of failing. Your father never questioned himself, never doubted, never wondered if he was doing the right thing. That certainty made him monstrous. Your doubt makes you human. Your fear makes you careful. And your love—" Her voice broke, but she pushed through. "Your love makes you strong enough to be gentle." He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, his body shaking with the force of emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. "I do not deserve you," he said. "I do not deserve this happiness." "Maybe not." She pulled back to look at him, her expression fierce. "But you have chosen it anyway. You have chosen mercy over vengeance, compassion over cruelty, love over duty. That is what makes you worthy, Theron. Not your bloodline or your crown, but your choices." They stood there in the garden for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the silver tree bloomed above them, and new life, in her womb, in the earth, in the kingdom itself, began its slow, determined awakening. That evening, Theron called an emergency council. Representatives were summoned from every northern house, riders dispatched to bring nobles from the farthest reaches of the kingdom. By nightfall, the great hall was packed with lords and ladies, warriors and merchants, healers and scholars, all gathered to hear what their king had to say. Elara stood beside Theron's throne, her hand in his, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Some gazes were warm, others calculating, still others openly hostile. Change was never easy, and many of the old families resented having an Omega, especially a Pathfinder, elevated to such power. Theron rose, and silence fell like snow. His presence commanded attention, not through force, but through the sheer intensity of his conviction. "I have called you here to share news that will shape the future of this kingdom," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive hall. "Queen Alara carries my heir. The child will be born at the height of summer, beneath the full moon." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, some congratulatory, others wary. Everyone understood what this meant. A Pathfinder queen bearing the heir to the throne would fundamentally alter the balance of power in ways that had not been seen in centuries. "I know change is frightening," Theron continued, his grip tightening on Alara's hand. "I know tradition offers comfort and certainty, but I ask you to look around. Look at what tradition has given us. Endless wars with the southern clans, villages starving while we hoard resources for military glory, children dying in the snow because we value strength over compassion, dominance over mercy." He paused, letting his words sink in. When he spoke again, his voice was harder, edged with steel. "That ends now. That ends with us, with this child." General Kale stepped forward from the crowd. "Your Majesty, with respect, what exactly are you proposing?" "A new order," Theron said simply. "One based on the old ways, before fear and prejudice twisted our culture. Alphas and Omegas as true equals. Pathfinders honored as healers and seers, not hunted as heretics. Education available to all, not just the noble-born. Trade instead of conquest. Alliances instead of subjugation." "And if the southern kingdoms see this as weakness," another lord challenged, "if they attack while we remake ourselves?" "Then we will defend ourselves." Theron's smile was sharp. "But we will do so with honor. We will not slaughter civilians or burn villages. We will not become the monsters we claim to fight." He extended his hand to Alara, and she rose to stand fully beside him, no longer in his shadow, but at his side. Her Pathfinder mark glowed softly on her wrist, visible to everyone, undeniable proof of what she was. "This is my queen," Theron said, his voice ringing with pride and challenge. "This is my mate, chosen not by political arrangement, but by fate itself, blessed by the goddess and bound to me by blood and choice. She is Pathfinder-born, the last of a line that was nearly exterminated by ignorance and fear. And if you cannot accept her, if you cannot accept what she represents, then you have no place in my kingdom. The door is behind you. Leave now or bend the knee." The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. The moment stretched like a blade being drawn, tension thrumming through the air like a plucked string. Then General Kyle, scarred and pragmatic and utterly loyal, stepped forward and dropped to one knee. "Long live the Queen," he said clearly. "Long live the heir." One by one, the nobles followed. Some quickly, their loyalty sincere. Others more slowly, their submission grudging, but complete. A few walked out, proud lords who could not stomach the changes, who packed their households and departed for lands where tradition still reigned absolute. "Let them go," Alara thought, watching them leave. "We are building something new. We do not need those who cling to what was." When the last noble had either knelt or departed, Alara stepped forward to address the assembly herself. Her voice was not as loud as Theron's, not as commanding, but it carried its own power, the power of truth, spoken without fear. "I will not promise you perfection," she said, meeting eyes throughout the crowd. "I will not promise you an easy path or a painless transformation. Change hurts. Growth requires pain. But I will promise you this. I will fight for you. I will bleed for you. I will use every gift the goddess has given me to protect the innocent and heal the broken. Because that is what Pathfinders were born to do. That is what queens must become." She placed her hand over her belly, over the tiny life growing there. "This child will inherit a kingdom in flux, a realm being reborn. They will face challenges we cannot imagine, but they will also inherit something more precious than gold or armies. They will inherit a world where compassion is not weakness, where healing is honored as much as war, where every person, regardless of designation or birth, has the chance to become their truest self." the hall erupted in applause, not the polite, measured kind demanded by protocol, but wild and genuine, stomping feet and raised voices, a cacophony of hope and determination. Later that night, long after the assembly had dispersed and the palace had grown quiet, Alara and Theron stood on their private balcony overlooking the city. Below them, lights flickered in thousands of windows. They could hear laughter drifting on the spring breeze, smell bread baking in late-night ovens, see children playing in the streets despite the hour. "Do you think we can truly change things?" Alara asked quietly, leaning back against Theron's chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Or are we just two people fighting against an ocean?" "I think we already have changed things," he replied, his chin resting on top of her head. "The moment you decided to save a dying boy instead of running. The moment I decided to remember instead of forgetting. Every choice we made brought us here. To this. To us. To them." His hand spread across her belly, protective and tender. "And the child?" Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "What kind of world will they inherit? One that is broken but healing," Theron said. "One that is imperfect but trying. One where they will have a mother who can call down the moon itself and a father who finally understands that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the courage to be gentle." He turned her in his arms, so she faced him, framing her face with both hands. "They will be loved, Ilara. Fiercely, completely, unconditionally. Whatever else happens, war or peace, triumph or tragedy, they will know they are wanted. They will know they are cherished. They will never doubt their worth." Tears spilled down Ilara's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Then we have already won," she whispered. He kissed her beneath the stars, softly at first, then deeper. A kiss that tasted of promises and hope and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. In the gardens below, the silver tree continued to bloom, its flowers releasing seeds that caught the wind and scattered across the kingdom, planting themselves in stone and soil, in hearts and minds, in the very foundations of a world being remade. Because some love stories are not written in ink or carved in stone. They are written in moonlight and blood and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. They are written by girls who save dying boys and become queens, by boys who become kings worthy of them, by children not yet born who will inherit a world transformed by their parents' courage, and by every person who chooses, day after day, moment after moment, to believe that mercy can crown even the fallen, that rejection can become destiny, and that love, real, tested, chosen love, is the most powerful magic of all. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.